So, why do the Japanese live 8 years on average longer than Americans? Find out today on this episode of Fit Talk Fridays, part of the Embetterment podcast. And welcome to Fit Talk Fridays. This is your host, Chris Harrington, and I've been really excited to air this episode and record it ever since I got back from Japan. So we're in July now. I went to Japan for most of the month of May, and one of the most shocking things that I did learn once coming back to the States was when I started looking at average life expectancy, and I compared the United States to other developed countries. I want to say more developed, but I don't think you can really be more developed than the United States of America. And I found it really shocking that the Japanese live 8 years on average longer than Americans. So I started thinking, like, why is that? And more important, like, not why do Americans live less, but why do the Japanese live more? Like, what healthy aspects can we take back from Japan as American citizens, people in America that are listening to this podcast, my viewers, my friends and family? Like, what can we actually take back from this and learn from Japan? So the statistics that I have in front of me are life expectancy in the US right now, 76.3 years. Japan, it's 84.5 years. So we're talking more than 8 years difference between the two countries. Another thing that was really shocking to me was Algeria ranks higher in life expectancy than the US. Algeria is a developing country in Africa. This stuff is shocking to me. How is it the case that arguably the greatest country in the world, the United States, is so far behind on life expectancy compared to some of these countries? Like, you look at countries like Spain, where they have an 84-year life expectancy. Predominantly all smokers, right? Like, smoking is a huge part of the culture in Spain. And they're still living substantially longer than us, which is really just mind-blowing. So I want to talk today about, take a number of the U.S. factors aside. There's going to be a couple nuances in the details: poverty, early childhood death or childbirth deaths, or really early, like, infancy deaths, are skewing the U.S. data a lot lower. And I don't want to have this become a political conversation, because this is meant to be around health and wellness. But if we take the political ends and put those aside for a minute, really for this whole podcast, we can talk about a number of those factors. But I'd rather really focus on, like, the opposite. Like, what is Japan doing that makes them so much higher on average? What is it that they're really doing well? There's a couple things that I pulled up here when I was doing some research that I think really jump out to me in terms of what are the top causes of death when we take out kind of the politics, poverty, infant deaths. We put those aside for the US, put those aside for other countries that we're comparing to. What are the top causes of death in the United States? So we're talking heart disease, obesity, diabetes. And these are, I think, areas where countries like Japan do really well, right? They have minimal heart disease, obesity, and diabetes. You don't really see many overweight people in Japan society. The activity levels are a lot higher. They're taking more steps throughout the day. They're more active. They're more out and about, public transit. Like, they're not just kind of sitting around as much as we are as Americans. And that's going to vary from person to person, but I think on average across the entire society, we're looking at people that are a lot more active. Activity levels are much higher there than they are in the States. They're doing a better job of avoiding poverty, famine, and homelessness. And that does attribute to the large mortality rates in the US and the large discrepancy between certain areas in the U.S. where life expectancy probably is closer to the 80s. If you're in a poor neighborhood, you don't have good access to healthcare or resources, then you're likely not going to live on the further end of the average. So that does pull the average down. And Japan has just done a better job of taking care of the entire country, their citizens, taking care of them as a nation. You don't really see poverty in Japan. You don't see famine. Like it's really hard to be homeless in Japan. The society has many fail-proof areas where they make it almost impossible to be that poor and on the streets. The other is what I call the Diet Coke phenomena. Now, I was in Japan for about 3 weeks, and I remember specifically one meal that I had. I decided, you know what? I'll get a Coca-Cola. Like, they've got the old-fashioned, like, glass bottles. I'll have that with the meal. And all it said in the menu was, Coke and a couple of other options for beverages. So I figured, I'll grab a Coke. And without me having to even ask or specify, they brought me a Diet Coke. And I thought that was really interesting. Now, for those of you who might not be tuned into the latest in research, from what we know of aspartame and the ingredients and artificial sweeteners, there doesn't really seem to be a risk for people to take Diet Coke and consume that. When you look at exorbitant amounts of aspartame consumption, that can lead to cancer. But we're talking like thousands of Diet Cokes a day, which is theoretically impossible, right? Nobody is able to consume that much. So that's a non-factor at this point. From all the latest research that we have, a Diet Coke and the artificial sweeteners are substantially safer than the massive consumption of sugar and empty calories. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One being the sugar component, which can be a cause for diabetes and spiking your blood sugar, but the other is the extra calories that are likely contributing to obesity. People that drink Coca-Cola and drink soft beverages are going to be more likely to be overweight because they are consuming more empty calories, and it's part of the habitual process that people who are overweight or not health conscious get involved in is drinking colas. So the Diet Coke phenomenon is what I point out here, which was really interesting to me going to Japan. The fact that I didn't even have to ask, and they only offered the diet option. No calories, no sugar. I didn't have to specify. So that to me was really interesting and just a cultural thing for them. They're choosing the healthier options. The other part is wealth equality. So we have just a larger, again, this goes back to some of the political implications. We won't dive too much into this, but the wealth inequality in the United States is much more substantial than it is in a country like Japan. So you're a lot more likely to find that there's extreme poverty or homelessness as opposed to a lot more people kind of in between and having basic necessities taken care of. The more likely you are on the extreme on that end of the spectrum, the more likely it is that you are going to fall under the average life expectancy in the States. That's just a matter of fact. The other part that I think is an important contributor is good hygiene and health. And the COVID-19 pandemic was actually a good example of this, where we saw the U.S. life expectancy actually drop for the first time in, I think, many, many decades. And Japan's done a really good job when we talk in terms of general hygiene. Cleanliness, wearing masks when you're sick, not spreading infectious diseases. So, and not even just infectious diseases, but colds and flus and things that can still contribute and cause death or severe illness. You are a lot more likely to be crippled than you are to die in this country. So you are a lot more likely to be crippled than to die in this country. So it is worth noting that, when you're sick in Japan, they wear masks and everything is clean. Compared to the United States, there's just a really, really large discrepancy between cleanliness in these countries. You're not going to go into a public bathroom and see a dirty mess in Japan, but in the United States, that's just normal. That's just a common thing. So, how other developed countries have substantially higher life expectancies, like what are the parts of that we can actually control? So let's take everything that I just covered and let's break it down into a couple categories. number one, and these are in no particular order, but these are all contributing factors that I think we can all learn from. And one is stress management, stress and stress management. Managing your stress levels. And I don't think Japan does the best at this, but I think it's worth noting as a potential cause of earlier mortality. If you're stressed from your job and you have high cortisol, that is likely going to lower your life expectancy if it's a chronic stress being induced on you. So being able to manage that is really important. The other is weight management. So we talked about obesity, and we talked about diabetes, heart disease. A lot of those tie into the obesity in U.S. culture, and I believe it's 1 out of every 3 people in this country are obese, or at least overweight to my knowledge. And in Japan, that's just not the case. There's just a massive discrepancy, so weight management is going to be really important. The other is exercise and the sedentary lifestyle. The more you exercise and the more active you are, it's just the longer or the higher the odds are that you're going to live longer. Access to healthcare, again, another part of this. Quality of healthcare, really big part of this. And then hygiene. So, going to your annual physicals, doctor's appointments, those types of things, brushing your teeth every day, getting a good amount of sleep, drinking enough water. Like, all of these things are really important, and these are all things that we can control. So I made a short list, and I'm going to just highlight what are the things we can actually proactively do on a day-to-day basis that can hopefully help to bridge the gap with where the U.S. is today, and really just help you on an individual level to be healthier and have not only your health, not only living long, but being able to have a good quality of life. So again, no particular order here, but a couple of areas that I highlighted are, one, stretching daily. Stretching is so important, and I think people don't realize, like, the older you get and, the more time goes by, you're not moving around as much, or you're maybe not as active as you used to be when you were younger. And our bodies just start to naturally round and stiffen, and our spine shortens, and we need to really be able to keep the mobility that we have in our bodies. So stretching daily is going to be really important. Walking more. We could all, we've heard about the 10,000 steps a day as recommended guidelines, and I don't necessarily believe that's the most important thing, but if walking is your thing, I think walking more can be good for everybody. If you can, choose to get a couple extra steps in every day. Meditation and other habits to reduce stress. This is another area when we talk about stress management and avoiding or lowering stress, because we can't fully avoid stress, but I think it's important to lower the amount of stress and have good habits to build towards reducing stress levels. And meditation and breathing exercises can be really important to that. This is something that Europe, I think, does really well, is the take time off and actively be off from work. So we often hear like the joke of France or other European countries that are off in the entire month of August as we get near the month of August. And it's really just part of that stress impact. It's important to be able to take time off. Exercising daily, like I talked about earlier. So cardio, resistance training, I think both of those are going to be really important for improving overall longevity. Both things I would recommend doing, the cardio and resistance training. Resistance training to build and maintain muscle mass, and cardio for cardiovascular health, your heart and your lungs. Less sugars and less empty calories, like the Diet Coke phenomena that we talked about. If you can, opt for the diet option. Take the Diet Coke instead of the regular Coke. It's loaded with sugar. It's not good for you. Sleep well and sleep enough. Circadian rhythm is so important, making sure that you're going to bed and waking up at similar times every day. And I'm not the best at this, and I'm always working on it, but it's really important to sleep well and sleep enough and have a good circadian rhythm. The other is eat more fiber, fruits, and vegetables. Now, I personally use psyllium husks, which are a fiber supplement, to make sure that I'm getting enough fiber every day. But fiber is highly tied to mortality, so I highly suggest that you add more fiber to your diet. Skincare, brushing your teeth, just these basic things that they're all important. It's all the little habits that add up that over time build longer longevity. sticking to doctor's appointments, whether that be a dermatologist, an annual physical, an eye doctor, dentist, like these are all important as well. And finally, again, in no particular order, drink enough water. I would recommend close to a gallon a day. It's going to vary a little bit depending on how much body weight you have, your body mass. The bigger you are, the more you would need to consume. But drinking water, it's not enough people are doing it. And when you feel thirsty, you're already dehydrated. So that's just another factor that I would add in of what you can actually control on a day-to-day basis to improve your health. So to recap, when we look at countries like the US that I'm in and that a lot of my viewers are in, and it's really crazy to see that we rank 8 years difference with other developing countries in Europe and Japan. And even countries like Algeria, a developing country, being ranked higher than us in life expectancy it's just a disaster. And there's a lot of things that we can control as individuals to really start to impact that number. I think personally we can live a lot longer than 76 with a good, happy, healthy life and quality of life. Not just living longer with ailments, but actually being healthy. So I hope you'll all find something from this, take a couple of the small habits from what I've discussed today and implement it in your daily lives. And I look forward to talking with you again on the next episode of Embetterment next Friday. Thanks, guys, and we'll talk soon.